Three, two, one. Oh my goodness. Good morning, good afternoon. Whatever it is for you, I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Zach Schaumler. This is Strong Opinion Sports, episode 404. Today's episode is a conversation with a good friend of mine, Dan Casey. It's funny, I feel like every time I have a guest on the show, I say, one of my favorite people in the football world. And it's never a lie. It is true. I love Joe Rozelle. I love Lawrence Owen. And I love myself some Dan Casey. Dan Casey's awesome. Our conversation today, it started really as a reaction to, I wanted to kind of have, as a jumping off point, talk about John Gruden, Urban Meyer, what happens when a coach loses trust in the locker room. And from that point on, we went off on we had a great conversation about all kinds of stuff, building confidence with your players. And man, he referenced John Wooden, the former UCLA basketball coach, like all kinds of really great stuff. And man, without further ado, enjoy my conversation with Coach Dan Casey. Joining me now is Dan Casey, friend of the show, one of my favorite humans talking about football. First of all, Dan, how are you? Welcome in.
I'm doing great, man. It's good to be with you. I know you're down there in Hawaii, and I'm in Texas, so we found some time.
Yeah, dude, it's awesome. It's weird. You're in Central Time, and that's the only time zone my brain can't figure out. Like
Right.
at West Coast, 3 hours. East Coast, 3 more hours, 6 hours from here. And then I'm like, Central. Oh crap, what's that? I've been like,
No idea what's going on. Yeah. Some folks call it God's time. So yeah.
fair enough. I wanted to bring you on because the Urban Meyer stuff, the John Gruden stuff, got my mind going, and I don't want to talk about cheating on wives or sending inappropriate emails. We're not the morality police, but I want to talk about the impact that can have on a locker room. And there's definitely a conversation to be had here. I actually thought it was interesting that John Gruden just stepped down and said, I don't want to be a distraction. That was interesting to me. I'm curious. I don't know how to even intro this. I probably should have thought of that more, actually, now that I think about it. But I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts generally on when that kind of thing happens and you end up losing trust with a coach? How does a locker room react, and how do you handle that as a coach yourself?
Man, I think the coaching profession, just kind of in general, is a very unique space to occupy because you are in so many ways set up in a position where, like, you have, whether it's 50 or 100 people looking at you to set everything in their life, at least for that season. So whether it's setting their schedule, setting the expectations, and one of the biggest challenges as a coach is how do you ensure that what you preach is kind of in line with how you live your life. And it's a very hard line to walk, and I think very few people, myself included, are able to walk it perfectly. And I think it's kind of like, I think coaches are not that dissimilar from, preachers and politicians, where it's so easy to say, oh, you're a hypocrite. You can't live up to kind of the things that you present to your team or to the media or to the fan base or whatever. And more often than not, folks are right on when they spot that or are able to kind of pull that out. And so I think, it's one of those things where, I had coaches growing up that used to say, we live in a fishbowl, like everything we do is open to scrutiny. And I think, the coaching profession is maybe more so than ever nowadays with social media and different things like that, more than ever, are you open to scrutiny that if your words don't match your actions, it's going to be immediate.
I thought it was interesting. So where he loses credibility is when, like, you have a bye week and he's like, "Hey guys, no, don't do anything stupid over the bye week." And then the coaches just laugh, or the players just laugh at him. They're like, "Well," and I thought maybe it'd be interesting if he just, like, literally goes in the team room with the whole team in a meeting, puts up the video of him with a woman dancing on him and says, "Don't be this guy. That guy's me." It's just extreme ownership of what's happening. And that's like the only extreme angle I can think of where you can maybe overcome that, because you have to own what happened. And we're not in the locker room. We don't really know, but I know that it would be hard as a player to be like, "Come on, man. Like, how can I trust anything you say now?"
Yeah, I mean, and once trust is lost, it can be something that's incredibly difficult to regain, and to work your way back from it. And so, I think sometimes we tend, as kind of the people that aren't in the middle of the situation, to kind of look at look at things from the outside in and think about like these events as isolated incidents or whatever. But I think, in all likelihood, there's probably lead up to these things. And there's maybe already a disposition within that locker room to like whether or not
Mm.
you trust that particular person, that coach. And it's something that's not just challenging for NFL coaches or college coaches. It's challenging for high school coaches. Um, it's very difficult. Like one of the things that I've realized in coaching, and I've even been victim of this at times. Is just like uh, high schoolers, football players in general, just sniff things out really quickly. And so if you're
Mm.
pretending, or if you're full of it, like they're gonna be able to spot that, and it really doesn't matter what level it is. And so I've had to learn that lesson the hard way at times early on in my coaching career, even of just there were times where I was saying one thing but really not able to back it up, and I had to kind of go back to the drawing board. And I think one of the lessons that I learned in those situations was that humility is kind of like always the best way to go, and just say like, look, I messed up here, and I need to continue to improve. And I can't remember if we talked about this last time we got on, but my sister's actually, she's a counselor, and she was sharing a study that she did in her counseling program, and she was talking about like parent and child relationships, which it can be relevant, especially when you're coaching in college or high school, because sometimes you take on that kind of parental figure. It's not the same in the NFL, obviously. But one of the things she was saying is, the biggest jump in growth that children have in reference to their parents are when they can look at their parents and watch their parents make changes in their own life, not their parents trying to force change in their kids' lives. And
Yeah.
so if you're a parent that kind of sets the example of like, I'm always going to continue to try and grow and improve and take ownership for my mistakes, and I'm living that out, that has a much bigger impact on the way your kids handle those situations as well, as opposed to you just saying like, don't get in trouble, don't party, like don't stay out late, like get good grades. It's more about you demonstrating like, I'm an unfinished product as well. And
Mm.
so I think that's something I've tried to, to the best of my ability, tried to model it for my own players. I fail pretty often with this, but that's definitely something that I think is telling. Like I think the guys that run into the most issue, guys or gals, whoever's coaching, like they run into the most issues when um, they kind of come from this position of authority, as in I have nothing left to learn. Like I've kind of reached the mountaintop, and I am who I am, and this is how I do things, and I'm not changing. And I think that's when you kind of run into that immovable object of ego. That's when you run into the most issues.
Dude, you just made me a better parent. That's so cool to like you can create a culture for your kids where it's normal to grow and admit your faults, and
Right.
it's the same with coaching. Like, there's a very like clear parallel there between the two.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And when you're caught up in the power dynamics of, I've thought of it at becoming a parent, and then thinking about, the way I coach as well. If I set up that power dynamic of like, I'm in charge, I'm the adult in the room, you need to do as I say. Um, that may work in the short term, but in the long term, in terms of understanding how to own and how to accept responsibility. I even had a coach tell me once, and this really like transformed the way I thought of it. He said, taking responsibility is is deciding to own the fact that you have an ability to respond in a certain way. Like
Mm.
responsibility, like breaking those two words apart and saying, when I take responsibility for something, it's controlling the way that I respond, and understanding that I have an ability to respond in a positive way to the situations that I encounter from day to day. And that was really big for me, of like, it's not just about asking my athletes to take responsibility, but also taking ownership myself and realizing that I have an ability to choose the way I respond to different situations. And that's like a continued process of growth. Like you don't all of a sudden become patient. You don't all of a sudden become understanding or empathetic. Like it's a gradual process that is going to take a lifetime. And so I think the coaches that I look up to the most are the ones that I can tell are working through that process in their own life, and they're getting better year after year. And then there's other folks that I think have kind of said, I am who I am, and this is how I do things, and listen to what I say, and maybe do as I say, not as I do.
It's really interesting to compare, and I don't know that it's what I'm about to say may not be fair. So let's like an exercise and we'll think about it. Maybe it's unfair, maybe not. Is comparing Urban Meyer and John Gruden. I remember when the first email leaked with John Gruden, and his players supported him. Like his players were like, "That's old. Like we got our coaches back." It was really interesting how like Josh Jacobs, I remember most vividly saying like, "That's my guy. I've never seen this in him in his actions in the time I've known him."
Sure.
And
Yeah.
obviously, more came out. He left, but Urban Meyer never had anyone defend him. Like none of his players had his back, and that was interesting to me. Now, one thing it's in fairness to Urban Myers, he's new. John
Sure.
Gruden's been
Yeah.
there for years. There's more rapport built. There's more time. But is there anything there you think where that no one defended Urban Meyer? None of his players reached out and were like, "That's my guy." That's not what I've seen him for. Like, what do you think of that? Is there anything there?
Man, I think for coaches and just more in general, you kind of always hope that your athletes would kind of see the best parts of you. But I think one of the things that I've learned is, football in particular is this extremely emotional game, and when you get to the highest levels, also obviously like that emotion carries on, and sometimes um, while you may have 99 positive interactions with a particular player, it may be that one negative interaction that really like sours the relationship. And to the degree with which you're able to come back from that negative interaction, um, you may feel like you can lose players pretty quickly. And so I think that's one of the big challenges. One of the things that I'm kind of excited about, to be honest, is that the culture is shifting, and not just in the NFL, but in college and even in high school. Like there's more ownership taken by the athletes, and they have more of a voice than they ever have before. Even growing up when I was playing, like it was just kind of yes sir, and you got on the line. You put your feet on the line and you did it. And I think there's certain positives to that as well. But I think it's kind of asking coaches now to revisit techniques in terms of like how are we how are we looking to motivate people? How do we expect to get the most out of people? And you've heard a lot of coaches start to use the term, instead of like, hey, we're going to be a championship team or something like that. You'll hear phrases like, we are trying to build a high performance culture.
Mm.
That kind of terminology is interesting because it's really about like each individual person maximizing their experience within that team environment, but also like being able to come together and perform highly as a collective. And so I think coaches just have, it's an exciting like frontier in coaching of like, what does it look
Mm.
like now, um, to with the power dynamics shifting, to be able to reach people where they're at, as opposed to, I have such a great opportunity for you that you have to just accept anything I do. And I think in one hand it is extremely challenging, but it's going to, I think, lead to some more positive interactions with
Mm.
players in the future. But in the meantime, I think we're going to have a lot of these instances where it's it's the player culture is moving forward and the coach culture is kind of there, standing still. And I think you're going to see, like, I mean, let's just bring up one example. Like, you listen to Brandon Staley talk. Like, that's a dude who has like gone through and understood the culture shift
Yeah.
with the players and understood how to interact with his players. I don't know if he'll win a Super Bowl. I don't know if he'll have a long career. I certainly hope so. I'm a fan
I
of
love the
his.
guy. He seems
I mean,
awesome.
he seems fantastic. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to instantly translate to success and a long career or anything like that. But I think you're starting to see these guys like pop up, and I think players are instantly taking to them. Like, how does Brandon Staley go from a D3 defensive coordinator to the head coach in the NFL in just a couple of years? It's because like he has an it factor of leadership, of understanding how to. It's not even how to motivate people; it's how to treat people to maximize who they are in those particular situations. How does a guy like Brandon Staley work with so many dynamic personalities in LA and get them to all buy into this vision, right? Like, same thing, not just the Chargers, but the Rams. Like, that defense has a lot of personality, um, a lot of, star power. How does some random guy from John Carroll get all those guys on the same page? Like, I think there's like some new age magic that you're seeing, and there's going to be kind of coaches I think are going to kind of be broken up into these two categories now.
I want to talk about culture in a moment with the next one, but I do want to. I'm not going to do this to you. I'm not going to like clip this out. But if I did, I would title it like Dan Casey reacts to Urban Meyer not flying home with the team. I was like, I just wanted your opinion. Like as a coach, you heard that he didn't go home with the team. That seemed out of like really weird to me. I'm like, I've never, and everyone said that basically. We've never seen that happen before. What was your reaction when you found out?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think this goes back to, what is your kind of current relationship with your team? I
Mm.
think for example, I've had teams that I've coached when I was in the middle of going through the adoption processes with my son and my daughter, and I was, communicative with them about kind of what was going on. And, for example, I don't take phone calls during pregame warmups of games, right?
Yeah.
I don't do that. That's not something I do. I'm focused on the game. But when I was adopting my son, like I got a phone call on the field 5 minutes before kickoff from my wife letting me know we matched with my son. Like that was a phone call I took in front of my whole team. And I don't think that was, it was, abnormal, but I think my guys understood like I was building my family and it meant a lot to me. I communicated that a lot to them. And so that wasn't something where they're like, oh, Coach Casey doesn't care about, the
Mm.
game or anything like that. So
Well,
for
they were probably
example, like
excited. They were
they
probably
were fired
like,
up. Yeah, yeah,
"Oh
yeah, yeah,
yeah!"
yeah. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I think it kind of goes back to like what kind of relationship have you developed with your team and what kind of culture have you built? Are you the coach that says, hey, family is first and everything? And so if I have a bye week, I'm going to be with my family. And obviously, you have to actually be with your family and not be doing other things. But I think there's ways to. I don't think it's the not flying home that's the issue. I think there's ways that I just don't think it's this like black and white thing.
Mm.
It's how you've communicated with your team. How have you set up the culture? How have you allowed room for guys on your team to be, active members of their family? And so I think again, it's you can get hung up on like I didn't fly home with the team, but maybe there's situations. I know Gus Malzahn recently was with his daughter when she was giving birth to her first child, and it's like I don't know how the team took that, but I think there's ways that you can communicate that to your team and communicate the value of your family and where it's not a big deal. But then obviously then if you're not with your family and you're doing other things, then again, instantly losing credibility. I mean, I think that that's just by way of example. I don't think it's as black and white as we want to make it. I think it's what kind of rapport do you have with those guys in the locker
Mm.
room, and then how do your actions match up with your values?
So they're on they play a game at Cincinnati. The team flies back to Jacksonville. He doesn't go with them. I heard one thing that I thought I wanted your thoughts on. Tony Dungy talked about this. He said, "What if there's a fight on the plane home? What if someone gets hurt? Like Urban, I would think is responsible for the team in that scenario. I mean, I guess they're adults. I mean, it is different than high school where you're like literally all in a bus driving from
Sure.
one
Yeah.
city to
Yeah.
another.
Right.
And these are grown men with millions of dollars. But is there some level of accountability for Urban simply just to be the guy leading the team home too?
Yeah. I mean, I think as a coach, your purview kind of extends far beyond the field, obviously.
Mm,
And again, my perspective is limited because I'm not a college coach. I'm not a
yeah.
professional coach. I'm a high school coach. But in terms of kind of responsibility that extends to the classroom, it extends to the weekends if you're having practices on the weekends, and making sure people are getting to and from stuff safely. And it's a little easier at the high school level because you're not only responsible to those kids, you're responsible to their parents as well.
Mm.
So I think it would be abnormal for the head coach to not be a part of the entire process of
Yeah.
executing, from start to finish a trip.
Well, I like though that you pointed out it's not black and white either though. Like there
Sure.
is
Yeah.
room for negotiation based on your relationship with the team. Like so because I
Yes.
would
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
what you said, someone will criticize, well, he's gotta watch out for the team, and it's both can be true. Like you can
Sure.
have
Yeah.
there is nuance in every situation.
Yeah.
Um
Without a doubt.
yeah.
Without a doubt. And it goes back to how well do you communicate with your team, and are your decisions kind of aligned with your values. I think as long as that's the case, there's leeway, you know. But as soon as those decisions are no longer aligned with the values that you've at least projected, that's when you run into issues.
It was interesting hearing Bruce Arians talk about his approach as a coach. Like called himself like the cool uncle that he would hope his players want to get a drink with, and that's interesting. And it definitely would work better with, again, NFL players, millions of dollars,
Sure.
and high school
Yeah.
guys. But how do you like total? A lot of guys talk about being a father figure, and maybe someone would criticize that and say, well, that's a bit presumptuous, isn't it, to think
Sure.
of yourself like.
Yeah.
So how do you? What's your approach when it comes to that whole idea, like being a father figure, a cool uncle? Like what do you do in that situation? What's your approach?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I kind of go back to, and I may butcher the quote, but I'll approximate it. I think somebody kind of asked John Wooden at one point, like, do you treat all your players equally? Like, do they all get equal treatment from you? Kind of expecting Coach Wooden, who's been like kind of this leadership, uh, kind of the ultimate leadership coach, and he had an interesting take on it. He said, I treat all of my players fairly, but I don't treat them equally because they're unique people.
Mm,
And so I think that's kind of the way you have to move in the world at this point. It's like, each athlete that you coach is going to have different needs, um, different things that work for them. In something as simple as, teaching them how to run a route. Like, there's a cue that may work for one receiver that may not make sense to another, and you're kind of having to
mm,
try and you can't teach them all exactly the same way. And so I think when it comes to those player relationships, it is really about kind of developing a unique relationship with each player. That some
yeah.
players really do need um, a little extra encouragement, and some other players maybe need a little bit more um, kind of clearly defined boundaries. And so it's really trying to figure that out, and it's definitely one of the that's why coaching, I think, is more of an art than a science. It's that you have to kind of figure out those relationships and a way to get them to execute, obviously, on the field as well. And so I think Bruce Arians, again, once you've gotten to a certain point where you have a reputation and you have um, established the kind of culture that you want to have in your building, it's going to attract people that want that, right? And
Mm,
and so I think there's a reason that people are coming to Tampa Bay. It's not just Tom Brady. It's not just a stacked roster. It's people, I think, especially veterans, want to be around a coach that's going to be understanding. Now, Bruce Arians is a fun uncle, but if you ever watched I guess it was All or Nothing with the Cardinals, I mean, he cut a guy on the spot for parking in his parking spot. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, Bruce Arians is a cool guy, like laid back, he's chill, but like, don't cross the line on that
mm,
guy, right?
yeah.
And so I think, is he going to cut Tom Brady? No, but again, if he's telling you repeatedly not to do something and you keep doing it, you will get cut on the spot. And so I think it's one of those things where there's a balance. I don't think anyone is all one thing or all another. Like, I think people all think, you know, Bill Belichick is as serious as a heart attack all the time, but the reality is, you watch him in those interactions before practice with his players, and he's laughing, he's joking. Like, I think he has more of a rapport than anyone from the outside looking in probably realizes.
It was really cool. I can't remember who talked. Some former Patriot, maybe Julian Edelman, maybe someone else. I don't know. Was talking about Bill, and he pointed out that like Bill didn't even make them have like a dress code at walkthroughs. And as a former player, I'm like, oh hallelujah! Like I wish I'd been able to just
Right.
wear. Like who cares? What I can't wear
Right.
red socks. Like how does that affect? Like none. It doesn't matter. And I really appreciated that, hearing that about it. Made me like Bill even more than I already did. I'm like, wow, like
Sure.
he's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
just it's football, and if it's not like important, I'm not going to worry about it. I,
Sure.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
No,
No, I mean,
yeah,
I think there's something to that. I mean, I think each coach finds ways, or at least tries to find ways, that are authentic to themselves, where they can kind of take the pressure off their teams.
mm,
And I think the guys that are high strung all the time, uh, those are guys that, again, they may have some success because of that organization and the expectation, but I think it's really hard to maintain over the long run.
yeah.
And I think players grow tired of it. You see Super Bowl teams that, or national championship teams that fall apart pretty quickly because it's really hard to maintain keeping everyone in line that aggressively. I mean, it's just hard to do. It's hard to
Yeah.
do.
How do you think Saban does it? Is it because his players are in college and they move on pretty quickly? Like he does go through coordinators like crazy. It seems like he's both hard to work with, but he will help you get to the next level. So they're making a deal with the devil. Like if you're a player, you're like, well, like it clearly is gonna get me to the NFL. I just got to do what this man says. So how do you think he like maintains that level of intensity and has maintained it successfully?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think he's the greatest of all time in so many ways. And I could talk about my perspective on it for hours, but I think
Do it.
I don't think Saban even gets enough credit for the ways that he adapts and adjusts and
Mm,
changes himself. And it very much reminds me, having grown up around the program a little bit or just had a view of the program, Duke basketball with Coach K. Coach K had a very specific philosophy for years and years and years. And then when he went to work for the Olympic team and got around Kobe and LeBron, um, he shifted his perspective, shifted the way he played, opened things up, took one and dones. Like there was he shifted, he changed with the times, and it allowed him to be insanely successful for a long amount of time. And Coach Saban obviously is very similar in that. Like he's basically flipped the game from a defensive focused game to an offensive focused game in the SEC, and he's been willing to do that, which is remarkable. But I think in so many ways, like one of the things that's great about Coach Saban is that he offers like very clear value propositions to people, and pretty unambiguously. Like I don't think he lies to people. I don't think he sells people a bill of goods. I think he's very honest and upfront about like what this experience is going to be, and if you're able to thrive in that environment, like you are going to be set up for success. I don't think you're
mm,
ever going to hear Nick Saban, um, just trying to get kids to fall in line. I think he's really offering them a value add to their own life and their own career. And
mm.
the same goes for the coaches that come through that program. Like there's no doubt if you join that program, you are going to be set up for success. And the expectation is challenging, and he doesn't flinch on that. But I think what's different maybe with Coach Saban versus some other coaches is I don't think he minces words about what it's going to be like. I don't think he's telling you one thing and then your experience is another. And so I think there's something to that. And now, can everybody get away with that? Because no, because they're not able to offer the same value that he
Mm.
offers. And so I think that's part of why the machine is what it is that he is offering the exact value that he claims.
Do you think that looks like he'll say, "Hey, son, if you do this, I think you can get here." Like, is it? It's very directly saying like, "Here's where this can take you." Like, when you say it's giving them value, he's saying, "Here's where you can go if you do this."
Yeah, and I mean he's right on the money,
Yeah.
and it's interesting too when he'll talk about like I know with certain players he said you're a third round pick, but if you come back you're a first round pick, and they've taken him up on that, and sure
Mm.
enough, there's other players where he's like, hey, you're a first round pick, you got to go, and they leave early, and so I think in a lot of ways he is pretty unselfish in the way that he handles those players. Like he wants them to maximize their potential.
Mm.
And the same is true with coaches. Like you rarely see him. And again, I'm not on the inside. I'm not a part of
Yeah.
these conversations, obviously. But like he very willingly lets those guys go and take jobs. But he will fight you if he thinks it's a job that's not going to benefit you.
Mm.
So he sets, I think, to the best of his ability, sets those assistants up for success at their next place, except against him. He's not gonna lose to him. But no, I mean, I think he is in a very unique spot because of what he's built, and he's kind of earned the right in that way. And I think most of the coaches nowadays really you can't replicate it. You can't replicate it because you're never going to be able to build something as prolific, and so you're going to have to find other ways to reach people.
No one's gonna trust what you say as much as they would trust what he says, what Nick Saban says.
No
Is that what you're
chance.
kind of mean?
No chance.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so you have to earn trust in other ways. It's not just resume trust, it's relational trust.
Do you think he recognizes that if I invest in these people, players, coaches, and I am unselfish, ultimately it'll come back around and reward me too? Is that kind of because it has
Absolutely.
clearly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it. How come every fired coach in America is an analyst at Alabama? How come every you know the NFL guys are feeding right back into that program, and it's kind of it's become cyclical in so many ways that they are able to just replicate year after year. And guys are even willing to sit behind other talented recruits because they know when their time comes, they're going to
Mm,
get that serious look.
yeah,
So it's man, I don't know if I've ever seen anything quite like it. Not in my lifetime, at least.
yeah. Can you talk about the role an analyst plays for a major college football program? I think a lot of people don't
Yeah,
know what that means and what that is.
yeah. So it's kind of this odd role where technically they're not supposed to be helping on the field at practice. Whether or not they actually help on the field at practice or not is debatable. But I think in a lot of ways that analyst role kind of serves as a brain trust for the coaching staff on either side of the ball. The reality is, as a position coach, you have so many responsibilities outside of the building, just in recruiting and all that you have to keep up with, managing those relationships. And even as a coordinator, you're asked to do a lot at the college level. And so I think those analysts can kind of come in and do a lot of the back end scouting work that allows you to kind of plug and play game plans. And
Is that
so
like self scouting, or other
yeah,
team,
so
or
it's
both?
self scouting and opponent scouting. So,
Hmm.
a lot of, at the high school level, like you do the best you can, but the reality is like you're not scouting 2 or 3 games ahead of your schedule. Like you're kind of keeping it up week to week and maybe getting a little bit ahead for your next opponent, the Thursday or Friday before you play. But that's about as good as you're going to do at the high school level. But you have these analysts that are scouting games ahead and charting breakdowns and doing all these things and helping you install. And there's actually this is more recent, but there's kind of a story that came out of LSU that, when they played Florida, it was an analyst or kind of a consultant that had said, hey, like, I think running counter would be really good for us this week. And sure enough, they ran counter like 15 times for like 15 yards of carry, and they just ran all over Florida. And so it's helpful to have somebody that's a little bit detached from like the day in day out like kind of grind of installing and game planning, and is able to offer you really actionable ideas. And so
Hmm.
obviously the higher quality your analysts are, the better ideas you have going into the game, and the better those things can be executed. And at certain places I would imagine they're also working with players on the field even if they're not supposed to. And so it's just one of those things that it's a weird kind of uh, it's a weird spot, in terms of like I don't think a lot of people understand like what those folks do, but I think they have a huge role to play, because the other coaches on staff are so responsible for recruiting, and that's just it takes a ton of work to be able to recruit at a high level.
Well,
So
if you're a former NFL coach, wouldn't it be nice to you're not having to deal with the running back room, you're not dealing with recruiting, you are like that brain trust talking about football. You're
sure,
studying and sharing information with people who you know are going to use it.
yeah, no, absolutely, and the cool thing is like one of the things that football coaches, especially the kind of nerdy X's and O's people, I would put myself in that category, for
Thousand
sure.
percent.
Yeah, and so one of the challenges of even like being a high school head coach is like 50% of what you're doing has nothing to do with football. It's parents. It's making sure the field gets painted. It's things like that. And so we as coaches we kind of like bemoan the fact that we're not actually doing just football stuff. And the cool thing about that analyst role, while it's not the most lucrative spot, I mean, it depends kind of where you are. But while it's not like you're making millions, you get to just do football all day. And I think that really appeals to a lot of coaches that are either getting their start or maybe that have been in the game for a while but don't really want to be on the road recruiting high school games every week. And so it's a pretty cool spot to be in where you're a value add to the team, but you're kind of just focusing on ball. And the NFL teams, they have plenty of consultants too that maybe aren't in the building but are giving input and jumping on a weekly phone call with a coordinator and offering breakdowns and advice and different things like that. You'd be surprised how much, especially with kind of the way the modern world is working now, and access to technology and being able to watch film and send things, like it's so easy to have consultants all over the country that are watching film
Mm.
and offering you advice. Even at the high school level, you can, send some huddle film to your buddies across state lines, and they can give you some really good ideas for that week. And I've certainly done it, and it's just helpful to be able to have kind of a second or third set of eyes on what you're trying to get done.
Mm. I got one last thing I want to talk about. By the way, you've done amazing. I love having you on. You're fantastic.
No, this is fun, man. This is fun.
I uh I followed. I don't know if it's your advice or your thoughts. You talked about how it trickles up. Like some of the best minds and most creative thinkers in football are at the high school level, and because they are free to really take risks and do whatever they want.
For sure. Yeah.
And I don't know. That led me to an interview I did with a guy named John Eagle, who coached
Hmm.
for years and years at Camas High School in Camas, Washington. He won multiple state titles. He's like a legend of legends. And then he took the job as the quarterback coach at Portland State after like 17 years in high school.
Yeah.
And not because he wanted a new challenge, pretty clearly. And I
Totally.
had a blast. Like I talked to a bunch of his players afterward. Like it was really this all encompassing experience. And I'd love to get you in touch with him if you want. He's like this really
Absolutely.
fun
No, for
mind.
sure.
And it was cool because he was literally asking me questions because he was just curious. Like he wanted to learn about the game. And I just so
I love it.
humble. And one thing he talked about that I loved, because every time I played against him in high school, I watched all his teams. His quarterback was the best I've ever seen in high school, and every single one of them was this fact was true about him at extending plays and keeping plays alive.
Yeah.
I've never
Yeah.
seen a high school so consistently have guys that could roll out or get out of the pocket, and we're calm, we're fine, and would repeatedly find people open downfield every time.
Yeah. Totally.
He talked about the way he achieved that was by just giving guys freedom to make mistakes and saying
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I'm not gonna bench a guy after one mistake, and I want them to feel free to take risks and be creative with the ball." And I see so many parallels between that and Patrick Mahomes. Like that's kind of he's been free to just do stuff and be creative, and he's not going to get benched if he throws an ugly interception.
Right.
I don't know what the question is, but I wanted your comments on just an open conversation of like your thoughts on letting players like Daniel Jones. I watch him sometimes in New York, the quarterback
Hmm.
there, and I feel like he's hesitant because he knows he's going to get flack for making a mistake here and there. He's not safe in an environment where he can truly just play freely. So can you talk about that, building that environment for a quarterback or for any player where they feel safe to make mistakes and then also grow and become a better player?
Yeah. No, I mean man, there's a lot to unpack there.
And that's not even a question. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's good. There's a book that I think Pete Carroll's probably famous for referencing a lot called The Inner Game of Tennis.
Hmm.
It's a great read for anyone who is just as involved in athletics, or it extends beyond athletics even to life, and it kind of gives some specifics on what flow state really looks like, and how to kind of detach, as an athlete, be able to detach yourself from that critical voice that kind of arises with each of us. Like, oh man, like how could you do that? How could you do that? We all kind of have to battle that self talk, whether it's as a coach or as a player, but particularly as a player because the bullets are live firing, and so I think. That's one of the greatest challenges is when you have it's interesting, you have this player empowerment that's kind of happening, and players are given more ownership, have more responsibility, have more influence. And what I've found is that with an increase in responsibility comes an increase in their own kind of self-deprecation and, kind of, that negative self-talk. It's more detrimental than really anything I could offer up as a coach of, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. It's like they internalize it so much, the athletes do. And so it's a real challenge to get people to kind of free themselves from their own selves and kind of be in the moment and play, reactively instead of playing kind of, in opposition to themselves. Like that's one of the things that, he talks about in the inner game of tennis with the, is you're not just playing against your opponent, you're actually playing against yourself,
Hmm.
internally, and that if you're doing that, you're always going to be a step behind. And so it's interesting from the quarterback position because there's a lot of information to process. And there is like there should be freedom, but also within certain constraints. It was interesting. We had a conversation on the Coaches Collective podcast with Mike Kafka, kind of talking about like, what is it like to coach Patrick Mahomes? And you just kind of say, kind of do whatever you want. And he's like, well, no, there's still rules that Patrick's aware of and is um, in line with, but we just give him a lot of freedom kind of within the structure of our offense. And you're able to like increase, what your offense really is because of that skill set. But it's not that he just kind of gets the snap and does whatever he wants. Like it may
Yeah.
look like that, but there's more structure even than we realize as outside observers. And so I think it's one of those things where the way I think of it at least is that it's not just telling an inexperienced player like don't think about it, be free. It's almost like how can we work with you to develop a level of mastery to where you have so much confidence in the basics that you're able to work in creativity. And that's really where I will kind of stretch beyond football or sports in general and talk more about art or music is like the people that are able to, like the jazz musicians that are able to play spontaneously. It's not because they don't know how to play, it's because they're so good that they are able to create in real time. And so
Mm.
I think that's something for younger athletes to kind of consider is, you almost earn the right to have creativity in your game. And I think there's a bunch of kids running around on basketball courts right now, pulling up from the logo and like shooting it from their hip, like Steph Curry. And the reason Steph's able to do some of those things is like, and again, like I was at Davidson and we didn't overlap, but he came back during the NBA lockout. And I don't know if I've ever seen anybody work on his game as much
Mm.
as Steph did. Now, this was before he was like Warriors MVP Steph. This was when he had hurt ankles. He was working on his game all the time. Even when he came back and was taking classes during the lockout, that guy was in the gym all the time. He also showed up to class, which was interesting. So I think it's one of those things where yes, you do want to give kids more creativity and freedom, but I think that comes from mastery, and that's one of the biggest hurdles to clear. Is like I think a lot of athletes kind of want access to that creative side of the game without spending the time to really master like certain parts of their craft. Um, and so it's kind of I don't know if this is really an answer to what you were asking, but uh, really the thing that I try to encourage them most of all is like master some of these more basic skills. And as you grow in that confidence, like let's layer in more things. Like
Mm.
let's layer in arm angles. Let's layer in different schemes that allow you to escape the pocket. Let's layer in some of these things where you feel like you're graduating to these things.
Mm.
It's not outside of the structure of what we do. It's like, oh, you're really good at quick game. All right, now let's work on some intermediate stuff. All right, let's get you out of the pocket. Let's boot you. Let's do some trick plays. Let's layer in things now that you've mastered certain other concepts. And I think that's where like coaches and players kind of are working hand in hand to try and get the most out of the team, but also get the most out of that individual skill set. Like, what do you do well? How do we accentuate that? And how do we let you like continue to ramp up the things you do well, to where that's kind of your calling card?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is you don't want like, especially high school kids, just recklessly running
Right.
everywhere, launching
Right.
the ball like
Yeah.
underhand and crap. Like, but how do I get Daniel Jones to extend a play? Like, there's little things like that where Daniel Jones hasn't mastered. Like, we could argue maybe hasn't earned the right to get to that next level. But there are times where I'm like, man, I feel like it's just a piece of his game missing where he's clearly a great athlete. And there's clearly times where I'm like, just extend the play, man. Like, it's like he's almost unaware of it, or it's like a missing piece of his game that I think he could be capable of. And I don't want to act like we're the person to like pull it out of him. But do you have any like? Because I'm not the quarterback coach in the New York
No,
Giants.
no,
Like,
sure, sure.
but how do you have any ideas like how you would pull that out of a guy like him who isn't quite he hasn't mastered the NFL yet, but there's clearly an ability there that I feel like isn't being utilized. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no doubt. No, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I was in grad school at Duke several years ago, And there was a walk-on quarterback there named Daniel Jones. And he wasn't getting to play yet. I think he might have been redshirted. And I was playing pickup basketball in the gym, and I'm end up in a game, and he's out there as well. And like, I don't think people like, I know people have kind of like jokingly talked about his speed and like miles per hour. I don't think people understand like how athletic that guy is. Like, he
Yeah.
was like dunking on the break. Like, he was unbelievable. He was a very good high school basketball player too at Charlotte Latin.
He can win
Um,
a race in the NFL against
no doubt.
defenders.
No
Like,
doubt. I mean, he's extremely talented physically, and I think he kind of gets undersold in that category for whatever reason.
mm,
But I think, one of the challenges is of being in the NFL is there is a ton of mental responsibility on the quarterback position. And again, I'm not in the building in New York, but I know that there have been. I think he's been through how many coaches has he been through?
I think definitely two. Definitely Pat Shermer
Okay,
and now Jason Garrett.
sure,
I
and
think he's on year two of Jason Garrett, I believe.
sure, sure. And while there's crossover, it's challenging. And if you don't have one of the best centers in the NFL, like if you think back to like Jeff Saturday or guys like that really process the game well. And again, I don't know who's at center for the Giants, but
Yeah.
you're able to put a lot of responsibility on the center position in terms of protections and different things like that. And when you have a lot of consistency at some of the skill position players, there's the I don't know if he's ever really been able to settle in. And again, I'm not a Giants fan. I don't watch every week, but
Yeah.
just in kind of general football terms, um, the more stability you have around you from a coaching perspective, and then in terms of like who you're interacting with on the field, like who is taking some of the mental load off of the quarterback position and kind of handling it. That's going to free up a lot of that like athletic ability to just
Mm.
kind of be able to play. And I think um, in Kansas City, there's a whole heck of a lot of creativity, and you're able to do it because of the amount of speed they have on the field. And then you also have really savvy players like Travis Kelce, and they have, I think he's a rookie, but one of the best centers I've ever seen in Creed Humphrey. And it's just amazing how much of a difference like having a really good center makes
Mm.
for a quarterback, because of the mental load they get to take off of you. And again, I'm not saying Patrick Mahomes is not processing a ton of information mentally as well. But it's challenging, and he's had a lot of consistency with Andy Reid, and that system has stayed largely in place, and he's been able to grow into it. And I think some of these young quarterbacks in the NFL, like, they're facing a ton of pressure, and when they don't have a lot of consistency around them, it can be hard to take that next step. And the difference between a good NFL quarterback and a great NFL quarterback, um, it is unbelievable how good you have to be to really make a difference in the game. I mean, you see the
Mm.
Rams with Stafford, like you see the arm talent and the ability that he has. Like, it ramps that offense up to the next level. And it's just, I mean, again, you're talking about a really good football player and a great athlete in Daniel Jones. Like, but some of the guys that are in the league with Rodgers and Stafford and Dak and some of these guys, like, there's just unbelievable talent in the league. And so to actually win games is really hard to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, even Coach Eagle talked about how if you see a quarterback who's playing hesitant and maybe playing the way we've seen Daniel Jones play at times, it is because they're usually thinking too much. Now, that's a high school
For
coach,
sure.
and then translating what he says to an NFL player, that's a rough comparison, but um, awesome. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? I just want to say thank you for your time. It's been so much
No,
fun.
for sure, man. It's been awesome. I enjoy getting to talk through these things, and I appreciate your perspective and kind of what you've built and how hard you work, because I know you put in a ton of effort and set up a lot of phone calls, and you do a really good job listening to what people are
Mm.
saying and kind of keeping the conversation moving forward. So I always enjoy getting to hop on these things. And I think more than anything, it's like, you know you are a perfect example of like someone who's trying to move the conversation forward, across a wide range of topics. And I certainly appreciate that, and I appreciate we live in a world that you can kind of bust it and make a name for yourself, and provide some positivity for sure.
I gotta say, what's cool about this world is I'm in Hawaii and you're in Texas,
It's
and we're
crazy, man.
talking in real time. That's
I
amazing,
know.
dude. That's
That's pretty
awesome.
cool.
I don't
That's
know.
pretty
I'm
cool.
like I'm so happy. I'm good. Glad to talk to you. You're always welcome, and thank you so much
Appreciate
for
it,
your
man.
time.
We'll do it again for sure.